Welcome to your deep dive. Buckle up, because today we're wading into international relations, economic policy, and social movements. Yeah, we're going to see how these things all kind of
It's
intertwine.
going to be explosive.
You said it. So, to get us started, you've brought a really interesting mix of sources.
Yeah.
We've got this Newsweek piece that reads like a geopolitical thriller, a deep dive from CBS News into potential tax policies, and a couple of Roland S. Martin's, fiery YouTube segments.
Yeah, he always brings the heat.
He does, he does. But what I found so fascinating is how all of these sources really highlight how political decisions can impact people's lives.
Especially everyday people.
Exactly. And particularly, it seems, African Americans.
Yeah, and we're going to unpack not just those potential consequences, but also the historical parallels that make this moment so significant.
Okay, so let's jump right in. We've got this potential international incident brewing. Newsweek is reporting that President-elect Trump is once again interested in acquiring Greenland
From Denmark.
from Denmark. And this time, it sounds like he's not afraid to, play hardball to make it happen.
Yeah, that once again is key here.
Right.
Remember back in 2019,
Oh, it.
Trump's interest in Greenland, I mean, it made headlines, but the tone is different now. This time he's suggesting military or economic pressure.
Hmm.
And that has, well, it's rattled some cages internationally,
Mm-hmm.
especially since, Denmark is a NATO ally.
Yeah, and Newsweek quotes some experts who are, well, they're pretty worried. They're saying that this kind of aggressive posturing could signal to other nations, like Russia, for instance, that changing borders by force is, acceptable again.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is. So Greenland, I mean, it's strategically important, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's got a
Yeah.
key location in the Arctic. And then there are resources. I mean, it's rich in things like rare earth minerals, which are crucial for everything from, smartphones to military tech.
Right, so it's not hard to see why Greenland has caught the president-elect's attention.
No, not at all. But you have to acknowledge the potential for, well, destabilization of international norms. I mean, it's a real concern.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about a potential international conflict. Now let's shift gears to the economic battleground. The CBS News piece outlines potential strategies Republicans are considering to not only extend the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but also add in those new tax breaks he promised during the campaign.
And the options they're considering are, well, let's just say they're sparking debate. They're talking about potentially eliminating the mortgage interest deduction,
Wow.
making significant cuts to social safety net programs, things like Medicaid. And get this, they're even considering introducing a blanket 10% import tariff across the board.
Okay, so break that down for me. What stands out to me here is the potential impact of these proposals. Is this essentially a scenario where the wealthy benefit from further tax breaks while others face increased costs?
It's definitely perspective worth considering. I mean, the document outlines funding these tax cuts by cutting programs that benefit a wide swath of Americans.
Right.
And that raises some fundamental questions about fairness and also, the potential economic ripple effects, especially for those who rely on these programs.
Right. And speaking of raising concerns, let's bring in that Roland Martin energy. His YouTube segments always bring such a powerful perspective, and this time he's diving deep into some historical patterns that feel eerily relevant to what we're discussing.
He's framing his argument around this concept of three reconstructions in American history.
Okay.
And these were periods where we saw substantial progress for Black Americans. But each one was followed by a period of intense backlash. And often, that backlash was driven by economic and racial anxieties.
And he shared this quote from billionaire Trump backer Robert Mercer. African Americans were better off economically before the Civil Rights Act. I mean, that's quite a statement.
It is, and it's a perspective you don't often hear in mainstream media. It really underscores the complexity of the economic and racial anxieties fueling certain political factions.
Mm-hmm.
Putting that quote next to Martin's historical analysis, well, it paints a very stark picture.
Yeah. And Martin is really taking aim at Black voters who sat out the 2024 election. He's arguing that their lack of participation directly empowers those who want to, reverse the economic progress that's been made. It's a call to action that's hard to ignore.
And it's a call to action that's rooted in history. When we examine those periods of Reconstruction and the backlash that followed, you see this pattern. Progress followed by efforts to restrict access to economic and political power.
So we've got this potential international land grab, controversial economic policies brewing domestically, and a fiery critique of political apathy. These might seem like separate stories on the surface, but I'm getting the sense there's a connection here.
You're right. You're absolutely right. What we're seeing is a power struggle. It's playing out on multiple fronts. You've got global power dynamics, economic policies, and racial justice. They're not isolated. They're all intertwined. And every decision made in one arena has a ripple effect on the others.
I see what you mean. I'm starting to see how these seemingly separate pieces fit together. But can you help me connect the dots a little bit? How does a potential conflict over Greenland relate to domestic tax policy and these concerns that Roland Martin is raising?
Well, it all boils down to resources,
Yeah.
right, and who controls them. Greenland's natural resources, particularly those rare earth minerals, they're at the heart of this whole geopolitical maneuvering. Whoever controls those resources, they hold significant economic and strategic advantages on the world stage.
So Trump sees Greenland as like a way to bolster American power globally. And he's willing to use, some pretty strong-arm tactics to get it.
Exactly. And then you look at those proposed tax policies, right? You could interpret them as a way to consolidate economic power within certain segments of American society. Remember those proposed cuts to social safety net programs? Well, that frees up resources that could then be directed elsewhere,
Yeah.
potentially towards, funding military expansion or providing further tax breaks to the wealthy.
Got it. Okay, so how does Roland Martin's argument about those historical patterns of progress and backlash for Black Americans, how does that fit into this power struggle?
He's arguing that Black Americans are facing attempts to limit their access to economic and political power. Again, and when we look at the historical parallels he's drawing, I mean, the common thread is pretty clear. It's a fear of Black economic and political advancement, which historically has led to efforts to suppress it.
So let me see if I've got this straight. If this Republican tax plan goes through and those cuts to social programs happen, which we know would disproportionately impact Black Americans, and if Black voters continue to stay home on Election Day, then, are we looking at a scenario where one group is basically consolidating its power at the expense of others?
That's the very point Roland Martin is making. He's trying to get people engaged, informed, because understanding the historical context of these issues is absolutely vital if we want to recognize what's at stake and actually take action.
Okay, so that raises a crucial question for me. If we accept Martin's premise that this is a potential moment of backlash against progress, what tools are available to counter it? What can people actually do?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Martin highlights the economic power of the Black community. He's urging boycotts of companies that don't align with their values. He's advocating for strategic use of economic leverage to drive change.
Smart. And he doesn't shy away from emphasizing the importance of voting. He's arguing that inaction only strengthens the hand of those who want to roll back progress. So political participation is absolutely crucial.
He's not alone in that call to action, by the way. Remember that fiery exchange between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Nancy Mace that you shared with us?
Oh, how could I forget?
It was a stark reminder, wasn't it, of the importance of having strong voices advocating for civil rights and holding those in power accountable.
It was like watching a real-life political drama unfold. It was intense, but it also underlined the fact that there are people in positions of power who are actively fighting for these issues.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to recognize that these battles are being fought on multiple fronts. In the halls of Congress, in the streets, in the marketplace, in the media, they're everywhere.
So for our listener who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this, what are the key takeaways? What should they be paying attention to as this complex situation continues to unfold?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to pay attention to those historical parallels that Roland Martin draws. Recognizing the patterns of the past, it can help us understand the potential consequences of the decisions being made today, right?
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But understanding history can also empower us to break those cycles, right?
Exactly. The second takeaway, I'd say, is to look beyond the headlines. Don't just accept the narratives that are being presented to you. Dig deeper. Investigate the motives, the potential consequences of the policies being proposed. Think critically.
So be a critical consumer of information. Question assumptions, consider multiple perspectives, and really try to understand the underlying power dynamics at play.
Precisely. And finally, remember that your voice matters. Whether it's through voting, participating in boycotts, contacting your elected officials, or simply engaging in informed discussions, your actions can make a difference.
That's a really empowering message. It can be easy to feel overwhelmed by, the complexity of these issues, but you're reminding us that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Yeah, it's a reminder that, we're not just passively watching history unfold, we're actively shaping it.
Mm.
And the choices we make today, from how we vote to how we spend our money to even just, how we engage with the world around us, all those things, they contribute to the future we're building. And it's a future with, well, some pretty high stakes. I mean, we're seeing these different threads come together, and they're painting a picture of, well, intense competition for resources and influence. And and this isn't just a game for the powerful either. The decisions made at these levels, they have a very real impact on the lives of, everyday people.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope our listener takes away from our conversation today? What's that final thought you want to leave them with?
Hmm. I'd say pay close attention to who benefits from the policies being proposed and who bears the costs. Follow the money, Understand the motivations and ask yourself, who is this system designed to serve and who is it leaving behind?
That's a powerful question to consider. It reminds us to look beyond the surface, to be critical thinkers, and to demand accountability from those in positions of power.
Exactly. And never underestimate the power of your own voice. The fight for a more just and equitable world, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It requires all of us to stay engaged, informed, and ready to act.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on. As always, stay curious, keep asking those tough questions, and remember, we all have a role to play in shaping the future. Until next time.